Okay, welcome everybody to another edition of the Psych Monologues. I'm glad that you could join me and be a part. And quite honestly, I realize I have been out of pocket for quite some time. I think we managed to cover it a little bit because of my social media team. We're also up to their eyeballs and alligators with school-related things and stuff like that. So the video came out at a time when I was out of pocket altogether. So and we're in the throes of getting back or getting into the summertime rhythm, which is not much of a rhythm right at this point in time. Although I will tell you that there will be developments happening in the next few weeks that I look forward to, and I certainly have the opportunity to introduce the newest member of the Mitch clan. But we went to see him and his litter mates. It's a golden retriever puppy. We're looking forward to having him join our family eventually, whichever one it is. We've got 5 different little males to choose from, and some of them are real spitfire and vinegar, and others are pretty laid back and probably belong in Southern California. So we're looking forward to that. And like I said, when the time is right, I will take the opportunity to let you introduce him. He can be the mascot for the Psych Monologues and some of the changes that are coming down the road here before too long. So anyway, I'll try not to get off track. The Psych Monologues. If you've never been with us before and you just stumbled on, or somebody gave you the invitation to join us, the Psych Monologues is a podcast that looks at the intersection of faith, psychology, and spiritual formation. And again, as I often say, those things oftentimes are not talked about. Faith and spiritual formation probably, but when it comes to psychology, most people are armchair psychologists, or you might say shade tree psychologists. They have their own little pet theories, and it really doesn't have much to say or much to do with the prevailing ways that we understand people, at least in psychology. So that's the Psych Monologues, and it's the voice of a larger organization called Stained Glass International, which is coming up on its first birthday before too long. And its mission is to equip, encourage, and empower the next generation of Christians to live authentically in relationship to Jesus, themselves, and other people. And that's the focal point of most of these conversations that I'm having. I'm not here to be the authoritative voice on all things. I am just here to bring up issues and hopefully get you thinking about it. And maybe we interact further and develop this community that is part of what I call the outposts for the heart and communities for the soul. And our hope is to plant outpost groups all over the country. That's the bigger vision. We'll start here in the Rocky Mountain area and just introduce a place that is safe. You can take your armor off. You can take your mask off. You can be known as you are and accepted as you are, not as you should be, because you're never going to be what you should be. And it's there that you begin to work out this relationship with Jesus, work out your relationship with other people oftentimes, or practice with the people that are part of your group. And then finally, just the even bigger part of working things out with ourselves. So what I want to look at, before I do that, another ministry is the Silent Retreats, and we just came out of one. I just finished one up last weekend. I think that's right. Yeah, last week at this time. We were just getting going, and, actually, we were just finishing up, actually. But Silent Retreats are meant to introduce probably 2 of the most ancient practices in Christianity that have lost favor or are not talked about nearly enough, at least in my humble opinion, called silence and solitude. And I'm putting together a compilation podcast that will allow you to hear the voices of people that were part of this last retreat and hear their observations and thoughts about the importance of silence and solitude in their own spiritual development and ultimately even their emotional development as well. So that's that. And that's really what we're about. And there will be developments, Lord willing, coming in the next few weeks of an opportunity to get involved, to invite other people to get involved. And I'm excited and a little frightened at the thought of all that, but it's coming, and you will be notified as soon as I have something to notify you of. In addition to, like I said, the mascot of the psych monologues that will show up here sometime after the 18th of June is when he will make his grand appearance. So on to the topic tonight. What I want to talk about is the spiritual journey and what people's spiritual journey looks like. And oftentimes we don't think anything about the journey at all. We just think about day in, day out. How can I interact with God? How do I maybe reestablish my relationship with God? Or how do I even just establish one? I might be in a place that I need some direction, and I need somebody bigger than me to help me out with this thing called life. And so how do I do that? The other part that I want to talk about is the fact that when we start our spiritual journey, and perhaps there are people that I'm talking to that have been at this thing for more than a few years, whatever that is, whether it's 5, 10, 15, 20, 50, whatever it's been. And what we often miss is not only how we got started, which was the last episode when we were talking about the spiritual journey and how we start this journey and what it looks like, but what we bring with us on this journey that sometimes we don't even know we're bringing with us. And so the very first stage, if you will, and I'm borrowing a lot of this material from a book called The Critical Journey. I would highly encourage you to get it. It makes a lot of sense, and it helps you to understand where you are in your own spiritual search and journey itself. So the very first stage, and I mentioned last time that when we talk about stages, usually we think about it in very linear terms. It's stage 1, stage 2, check off the boxes. I'm through that. I go on to stage 3. And that's not really how the spiritual journey works at all. And I likened it last time to climbing a mountain, but climbing it in a circular fashion rather than a straight up fashion to the highest point. And and what happens is that the paths can collapse down on one another. So I can be in 2 stages at the same time. And so stages tend to create the false impression that if I'm in one, I can't be in any others. And that's not entirely true. And you'll see that even as we go further along. So the very first stage of the journey is something referred to as the converted life, or becoming or having a recognition of God. And one way to think about this is imagine starting a brand new friendship or a relationship and being kind of swept along with this thing. The person is new. It's fun to understand what their background is, find the similarities and the things that we have in common. And a lot of times the conversations are, excuse me, are exciting. They're fun. And that's really what this is like. And people that are in this recognition of God kind of stage are swept away by the experience of the relationship. And we really don't look at any of the negative aspects of it at all. We only see what we have in front of us. It's better, at least in our point of view, it's better than it was before, or at least it's different than it was before, and that's better as far as we're concerned. The other thing to keep in mind is it requires no study. There are no prerequisites. We just come into it and we throw ourselves into it. Now, there are certain characteristics of this part of the journey, which is the very first part. The thing I want you to keep in mind is that we bring us with us into this journey. It's not a matter of we come as a clean slate As they used to talk about a tabula rasa, a clean slate. We're not coming in that way. We're coming in with, oftentimes, all sorts of concepts about how relationships work. How does trust work? What do I need to have in terms of control? How do I handle my boundaries? All of that stuff we bring with us into our relationship with God as well. And so one of the first things, and people come to this stage for a variety of reasons, and one of the characteristics is they're blown away by the awe of being impressed with someone or something way, way, way bigger than us, so big that it makes us feel childlike. It's like, this is way bigger. I am amazed by this person or something, whatever this is. And it is delightful, it is endearing, and I just want to study and be a part of it completely all the time. And it's pretty comfortable on top of it. And so when you see somebody come to faith in Jesus and start their relationship, they are really, really excited. And oftentimes they're blown away by the nature of who Jesus is. And they are very childlike. I didn't say childish. They are very childlike, and they are more likely to recognize God in their lives than a lot of the older adults in their lives. And that's why oftentimes children come to Jesus and come to a relationship with Jesus way before any adults do. And so the response of awe, of yielding, of accepting, the reality and presence of God in our personal world is just, the world is popping with meaning, literally. And so the sense of awe is one aspect that might draw somebody into this relationship. The second one is a sense of need. And this is the one that I think tends to present us with some real problems, partly because we have such a complicated relationship with the whole idea of need, okay? And the thing I want you to keep in mind when I talk about this is that I have people that flat out say, I shouldn't have any needs. And if I have any needs or admit that I have any needs, one, it makes me vulnerable. Two, it makes me weak. And three, potentially, we don't want to be seen as needy. And there's a huge difference between having needs and being needy. The same difference between breathing and gasping for air. Okay? So we meet God out of a deep sense of guilt that plagues us. We get so tired, and actually it's not guilt, it's shame. We feel so condemned, so not fitting into the world that we're in, that we're looking for anything, and the shame has become so debilitating that it seems like what God is offering us is a breath of fresh air, an opportunity to breathe, and that's true. And so in meeting God, during this sense of need that we have, is that a lot of times what you have is people reach the, quote, you've heard this phrase, I'm sure, the end of their rope, right? And AA has a funny, not funny, but very true statement, or they have their aphorisms they love to use in AA, but one of them is you can't hit bottom, which is a key concept in AA, is hitting bottom, but you can't hit bottom until you stop digging and come to a sense of need. And that's what oftentimes people are moved to going into their relationship with God. So what they do is they let forgiveness sink into their shame-ridden souls, and they accept the cleansing of God's acceptance as a true gift, as a gift that is given them free of charge. It was a costly gift, but it's still given to me freely. And that's one of those first places that we have to confront our preconceived notions about gifts, and that is nothing comes to us for free. And so if this is coming to us for free, then either we don't believe it, or we believe that it's for somebody else, or we just say, okay, I'll believe it, knowledge, but I won't accept it, heart. And there will be this disconnect. And so we will be Christ followers that know everything about Jesus and know nothing about relating to him. Nothing at all. And so there remains in a lot of cases a feeling of real rejection in life that lingers after seeing God in this way. And it can come, rejection can come from a lot of different places. And quite honestly, there's a rediscovery in some of these places by people that have left the church because the rejection they feel is from the people of the church people, and them saying things and representing Jesus that is not in Scripture at all. They're very much like Job's friends, and if you look at that book, one of my favorite books of the Bible is Job. And one of the reasons it is because of how real it is. Because his friends are just like church people. We got to have an explanation and a reason for why somebody is struggling, rather than accepting them as they are in their struggle and let God figure out the rest. And so this sense of need is lurking in the background, and if I am going to accept that I have a need, one, and two, speak what my need is, then I am in an extremely vulnerable place. Because one of the reasons we don't speak our need is because we don't want to hear the answer, because we think the answer is going to be the same as the answer we give ourselves. And oftentimes the way I put it is that, you won't like me anymore. You won't like me because I don't like me. And how in the world can you like me if I don't? Because you'll just feel the way I do about me, and I'm not willing to open myself up to that. So oftentimes people will go into this sense of need and accept it intellectually because it's easier to do, but it never really soaks into their soul, into their heart. And they end up being Christians that know everything. Like I said before, they know everything there is to know about the Bible and Jesus and doctrine and everything else. And oftentimes they hide behind the wall of doctrine so that their broken hearts are never seen. And it never soaks into their hearts. Now, that may sound like an extreme statement, but I can tell you from having talked to people for a long time, and being one of them, I might add, because I was one of those people, is that I knew all sorts of things. But my knowledge didn't connect with my being, my heart, and what was going on there. And sometimes you'll hear people say, it's the toughest 18 inches in our body is from our head to our heart. And because of the disconnection between those. Quite honestly, I think, and I might actually do a podcast episode at some later point in time about this, but the greatest obstacle, are you ready? The greatest obstacle to our intimate, personal, conversational relationship with Jesus is what we know. Is what we know. Because we think what we know substitutes for being loved as we are. And don't miss that. Do not miss that. Because, like I said, been there, done that, got the t-shirt and went home. I was one of those great, knowledgeable Christians, and I thought that was all that was needed. And then somewhere along the way, God decided to kick the props out from underneath that house of cards, and I found myself in a hole. And then what do I have left? I have me with me. Oh, that's comforting. That's real comforting. So there's a sense of awe, there's a sense of need, and then the other one is a natural awareness that is a characteristic of this kind of stage, if you will. And natural awareness, and you probably have met people like this, that there are people that clearly and completely experience God first and foremost through their senses, watching a sunset or going on a hike and seeing the wonder of creation. And nature will provide their actual first entree into the spiritual journey. And that's why a lot of times you'll hear people say is that I'm not sure I know when I accepted Christ's lordship over my life, or I accepted Jesus into my life, because it was kind of a gentle entry by seeing him in the world around us. And Paul makes that point in Romans when he talks about the fact that creation displays God's glory and the wonder of his artistry. And all you have to do, and I got to get a drink here. Hang on a second. I am not, just so the record shows, I am not a gardener. I am not in any way a gardener. I don't even. I am. I am the workhorse for the gardener of our house, and that would be my wife. And she has some irises that are just now coming up. I'm pretty sure that's what they are, because that's what she calls them. Otherwise, I wouldn't know, and I wouldn't care, quite honestly. So, and these irises are phenomenal in the intricacy of the color in their leaves. And that's probably not the right word for the flower, but it's absolutely stunning. I would suggest to you, it would make Michelangelo blush, the wonder of that creation. And that's how people oftentimes experience God, is in creation itself. And we oftentimes may overlook how spiritual our creativity is. And people who create are co-creating with God oftentimes feel closer to God by doing that. And it's very much a part of their experience in having God. The thing that we have to keep in mind is that stage one of recognition of God, or the converted life, it tends to elicit a certain sense of innocence and a ready acceptance of anything having to do with God. It's like being a sponge, and they're soaking up everything they can to get into it. But there's a downside to this, okay? And this is what we bring with us into our experience in our relationship and in our journey with Jesus. And where we can get stuck is, instead of feeling the love and the awe and the things I just mentioned, we think of God, and other Christians for that matter, Christ followers, as constantly having expectations of us that we can't measure up to. And when that happens, you usually will hear the word, I guess I'm just never enough. And those two words, never enough, is signal words, if you will, of how we are making some comparison of ourselves to someone or something. And so what we end up doing is we dwell on having failed others, or are certain we will fail them because of these expectations. I will tell you without a shadow of a doubt that wherever there's disappointment, there is an expectation. And oftentimes shame enters this picture right at the very beginning of the journey. Okay, so right out of the gate, shame enters the picture as the primary means of motivating us, because it's familiar. We know what that kind of motivation is. It's like, I'm not good enough. I need to strive harder. I need to do more. I need to be more perfect, rather than being motivated by grace and love. So the earliest lessons of our relationship in our spiritual journey, our earliest lessons are still tainted by the very thing we brought with us, and that is the voice of shame. And what comes of that is a sense of worthlessness, even in the midst of all of this. So I can have this sense of awe, but then I'm in this tug of war with not feeling worthy of having that kind of relationship with the God of the universe, who wants to be personal with me. And so the narratives that we've been playing in our heads prior to our recognition of God get brought in and intermixed with our new understanding of God. And I think I've said this before, but oftentimes little kids, when you hear them praying like, dear Heavenly Father, what they're probably more likely saying is, dear heavenly version of my earthly father. And see, these patterns are laid in early, and they remain with us for a long time until they get disrupted somehow. And sometimes it's a teacher, sometimes it's a teaching of some sort that gets us going, and gets us, our world rocked enough to want to do something a little differently or see something a little differently. But the problem is, again, is we live in a world of information, and we have an undying faith in just more information will help. And it isn't information that we're lacking. It's trust that we're lacking. That's what we're lacking. So we feel worthless. We feel what you might call a spiritual bankruptcy, and I have nothing to trade. And this gets us stuck at this early stage of the journey, is that it's like I keep looking for a way to trade with God for this awesome gift of love and grace and redemption and all these other things. And what is that? It's a contract. And guess where I have that? I brought it with me into this relationship with God. So there's a spiritual bankruptcy. The other one is feeling martyred by the world around us. Like we get the feeling that the whole world is out to make life tough for us, to hurt us, to humiliate us, to get us somehow, and certainly not to help love and care for us. So, it's a sense of martyrdom that oftentimes we feel. Sometimes it's the concepts we have about being a Christ follower. It's like, I'm supposed to be persecuted. Well, yes and no. I mean, we don't have to go looking for it. I think it'll find us anyway, just by living, a consistent but also a passionate life with Jesus. I think it'll find us. But frequently when we're stuck at this place, we carry a lot of anger, but we don't deal with it. And again, these are the old patterns. If I've had a relationship with somebody in authority and I don't have the right, or I'm not encouraged to be specific about what I'm frustrated about or angry about, then what will I do? I will apply that to God. And then I'll take one step further and say, God doesn't care. He doesn't want to hear. He won't answer my prayer. You name it, whatever it may think. And so we oftentimes think that just by following Jesus, we're going to bring about our own suffering and persecution. And like I said, that may or may not be true. Certainly, if you listen at all to news reports, Christians are persecuted the world over. They've been being persecuted for a long time. So the last thing I'll mention to you and how we get stuck here is really just flat out what I don't know. And the word we would use is ignorance. It's not stupidity. I have something, I know something, I don't use it. But it's ignorance. And so oftentimes we fall into why try to understand and learn about such matters, or since we know so little. And so we feel incapable, and it brings up old feelings of inadequacy and inability. And so that gets us stuck at this stage as well, and we feel disconnected. And whenever we feel disconnected, not only from God, but we tend to isolate from others as well. And so we feel this sense of rejection, of low self-esteem. That's oftentimes a predominant feeling in this stage that we feel. And so as a result of the fear and the self-abasement, and somehow we've gotten this strange notion that being humble is being self-deprecating. And it's not. See, the thing is that as we get going on this journey, nobody really necessarily spells out for us what are the byproducts, what are the fruit, if you will, of a relationship with Jesus. Well, initially we get reminded how little we know, and if we don't handle that very well, or we don't have somebody to encourage us to say, look, don't hurry this. It takes time. It takes a lot of effort. It takes some consistency and perseverance through it all to be able to grow as a little child does in your faith. And we don't like that. Feeling weak and feeling behind somebody else will oftentimes get us into a lot of trouble. So what you may be asking or wondering about then is, okay, so how do I move on? If I get stuck in one of these places with self-rejection, or, the shame narratives I bring with me, or, things as I just don't know and I haven't learned yet, or anything like that, how do I move on? And probably the first and foremost thing I would say is to look for a strong support network of people you can be a part of. Now, this is a great opening for me to make a pitch about our outpost groups, because that's exactly what our outpost groups are designed to accomplish, is to give you a place to not like I said at the very beginning, to not only belong, but to believe. And if you reaffirm or you reconnect in your relationship to Jesus, you're going to need people around you who are on that journey with you. And they're not afraid of your doubt. They are not afraid of your questions. They're not afraid of your anger. They're willing to walk through that with you. That's the strong support group that we need early in our relationship with God and with Jesus. We do. We need somebody of perspective, somebody that's been down the path a little ways, that will come back and say, listen, let me tell you a little bit about how this works. And not that you trade your works for being better or being accepted or anything like that, but somebody who encourages us, sometimes by modeling more than by telling us. Because there's a lot more oftentimes that is learned by watching than being told. Because again, if I tell somebody something, I am saying to them that information and knowledge is more important than learning the ropes, if you will, of being in a relationship with Jesus. And so the thing that we have to grapple with, first and foremost, is not only a group that will help us grasp and be accepted as we are, not as we should be, but also they help us to accept grace. And they help us to understand what grace is, because ultimately, grace by its very definition is the beginning of healing, because it offers the one thing we need most. And this group does as well. And what do we need most? To be accepted without regard as to whether we are acceptable. That's what we need most. We need to know that we are accepted, whether or not we are acceptable. We have to struggle with that ourselves usually. But oftentimes what people offer us is out of whack with what we believe about ourselves. And what we believe about ourselves oftentimes gets in the way of seeing what we're being offered. by the people in a group like this. And that's the key, because in a lot of cases, we learn more from one another by the stories we tell than by the information we are told. Let me say that again. We oftentimes learn more by the stories we tell or hear than any of the information or knowledge we gain by being told. Because there is companionship, there's camaraderie, there is brotherhood and sisterhood, there's community in telling stories of our own journey to one another. And we oftentimes, and I have to remind people of this, we think that if we're going to tell a story, then we have to give the person what the application is. And we don't. The Holy Spirit that lives within us will handle the rest, and he doesn't need our help, quite honestly. So grace offers us the one thing that we need the most, and that is to be accepted without regard to whether we are acceptable. There are a number of things about grace I want to remind you of. The first one is grace creates a space for freedom. For freedom, not for more rule making and rule keeping. It creates a space for freedom. Why is that important? Because, quite honestly, Jesus came so that we would be free to choose. Up until his coming, up until his death and resurrection on the cross, we were enslaved and had no choice. But he comes and he's resurrected and he defeats death, the one thing that is held over us, the death of a relationship, the death of key people in our lives, our own death. That can't hold us hostage anymore. And so now we have the freedom to choose whether or not we want a relationship with him or not. The interesting thing about that is that Jesus and God wants to be chosen every bit as much as we do. They do. They do. Not that they have that as a need, but they want us to choose him. And so it creates a space for freedom. It creates a space to learn a new response. And we are very intolerant of learning. We expect ourselves to know, but not to learn, because learning requires mistakes and stumbles and other things that we think we should have done. See, and this is one of those places where shame enters the picture. And finally, grace creates a space to learn something more about ourselves. And this is what I mean by the mission of Stained Glass International, to learn and to live authentically with myself and others and Jesus. And so grace creates a space, and we experience grace as a pardon. It is the answer to our guilt and shame. We experience grace as acceptance because it is the answer to our shame. And we experience grace as power because it is the power to move toward my true self. Not the self I define, but by the self that is defined by a relationship with the God of the universe. And then finally, I'll mention we experience grace as gratitude, having a sense of the gift of life and gift of relationships and the things that people give us volitionally. They give them to us. It isn't an obligation. We don't like that any more than God does. But there's a certain lavish generosity of God to lavish us with these kinds of relationships. The thing to keep in mind is that grace creates this context for growth. And the interesting thing to take note of is that children grow before they know anything about anything. I'm sorry, I'm saying this wrong. Children grow before they know anything but love and grace. That's how they grow. is a context of love and freedom and grace. That is the space that happens. Somewhere along the way, we get to be adults and we think the rules don't apply to us, and then we use the word should because we should know the things by now because of how old we are. And that just doesn't cut it anymore. Grace encourages us to, because human limits are accepted. I have limits. We say that intellectually, but we condemn it emotionally. And grace allows for what I call crockpot growth rather than a microwave product. And that's some of what grace offers us. So the last thing I'll mention to you, which is really very important, is grace creates this context for self-acceptance and accepting a gift as it is given to us, not as we see it because we're so undeserving, but it's given to us free of charge, completely to empower us to do all of these things that I'm just talking about. All of these are being brought into this very first stage, and that this first stage is a very, very important one. We need clear mentors to be in our lives that help us understand what to pay attention to on the road ahead for our journey, not for theirs, but for our journey. And they have enough foresight to be able to help us do that. And that's what a support group is for. You have a support group of people that is varied, of various ages and stages in life and experiences that will help you develop a depth of view at this stage in your development that is really pretty important to pay attention to. And that's part of this very, very first stage, the recognition of God or the converted life. And whether or not you're here or not, oftentimes, and like I said, and I'll just loop back and then I'll finish. Oftentimes, what I hear a lot of is people leaving the church and they're doing something that they refer to as deconstruction and then reconstruction. And the reconstruction is every bit as important as the deconstruction, because ultimately deconstruction is pretty easy. You just blow the thing up and start over. But reconstruction takes a lot of care to not repeat the same mistakes that we made before. Because a lot of times those mistakes are very comfortable to us. And we will do it all over again and then wonder why we're so far afield by the time we get to the end. So that is it for tonight. Hopefully it'll give you some food for thought and some things to kind of put into the pot, if you will, for you to think about. If you have questions or anything, please DM me on Instagram at the Psych Monologues. Happily accept those kind of questions and so forth. You can subscribe on the website at drmitch.com, or you can follow us as a podcast on any of the platforms that you get your podcasts from. Another product, actually, that is on the website at drmitch.com is what I call a digital devotional. And if you're interested in developing a clear understanding of what good, healthy relationships look like, what setting new boundaries looks like, which is every bit as important, really, you will get a devotional if you sign up. And it is a means of supporting the mission and vision of SGI. But you can sign up for a month at $5 a month, or you can sign up semi-annually or annually. All of that goes to supporting SGI and the silent retreats and the development work that we're really pretty heavily into right now. And so you can follow us that way, or you can get the digital devotional and you'll get updates there as well. You can follow us on 3 of the social media outlets that we have. Like I said, Instagram at the Psych Monologues, Facebook, ray.mitch, and LinkedIn Dr. Mitch. And like I said, you can find the podcast on any of the platforms that you tend to listen podcasts from. You will find us there as well. Last but not least, and again, I think by the time I get to this point in the program, people are already gone, but I would hope that there are those out there that have enough of a concern about the next generation that they'd be willing to partner with us to continue to grow SGI and our scholarship fund for the silent retreats to scholarship people that can't afford it. And just as a means of a reminder, all of your gifts to SGI are tax deductible, and so you'll receive a receipt that you can use on your taxes coming up in next year in 24. So all you have to do is just mention SGI. You can go to the end of the first page, and there's a donation button. You can choose to give to the silent retreat or the development work that we're working on to have a robust website that will allow us to run groups there, and so much more, resources and courses and all sorts of things that, Lord willing, we'll be able to develop into the future. We can't do that without people partnering with us to accomplish that end. So if you'd rather send us a physical check, you're more than welcome to do so. Just simply make the check out to SGI or Stained Glass International. The address to the same name is P.O. Box 322, East Lake, Colorado 80614, and that's Stained Glass International, SGI, P.O. Box 322, East Lake, Colorado 80614. Well, that's it for tonight. Thank you so much for joining me. I feel honored and privileged that you would join me for an hour or so to talk through some of the key issues of the spiritual journey. I look forward to seeing you next time, and until then, love ya. Later. Bye.